Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Therasas podcast. And today we're going to be talking about three critical aspects of intake coordinator success. And to help me have this conversation is Emily Ferguson. She is the founder of Confident Private Practice, and she helps mental health practice owners achieve business confidence. She offers business coaching to practices of all sizes. Utilizing her experience running the day-to-day operations of multiple therapy practices, she works with practice owners to grow their business, reduce their stress, save time and money, and become financially stable. Welcome to the show, Emily. Really great to have you.
It's really great to be here. Thank you.
Well, one thing I want to do before we jump in is just kind of share maybe just a quick little origin story, how you kind of got into being this kind of operations specialist. Because we had conversations before we started recording this podcast on like fractional COOs and things like that, which is becoming like a real needed thing for practice owners these days.
Yeah, absolutely. So I got into the therapy world first as a client and just have a really great appreciation for everything that therapy can help with. And then I was an operations manager in the e-commerce world and selling t-shirts, and that's not very fulfilling. So I dove into therapy as an intake coordinator. And through that intake coordination position, I helped this small group practice grow. She had just hired her first therapist, and I was her first intake coordinator, and I'm actually still with her today as the operations manager now. And so as I learned and grew through that practice, and then brought my previous operations management and other management skills into that position, I realized I could be doing this for other practices. So I branched out and started working as a COO or fractional operations for various practices, and then started doing business coaching. And so I've seen the business side of the therapy world, everything from intake coordination to the hands-on day-to-day running of the practice and coordinating with marketing teams and lawyers and accountants, and just kind of tying everything together in the practice.
Oh, great. Cool. And so all right, that's really important because I know my wife is, she's been exploring this idea of hiring a director of operations or COO fractional and that type of thing. So yeah, let's table that. I'll have some questions, I think, towards the end, but I'd like for us to talk about the topic at hand, which is the three critical aspects of intake coordinator success. So why don't you walk us through, because you have these three here: empathy, knowledge, and confidence. And I'll let you break it down.
Okay. Yeah. So in my time as an intake coordinator myself, and also now having trained many successful intake coordinators, kind of narrowed it down to these three aspects of success: empathy, confidence, and knowledge. So empathy, that is, obviously you need somebody on the front end of a therapy practice who can be empathetic, who can offer reflective listening, and really genuinely connect with clients. And this is just so important because this is the first person that a client will speak to in the practice, and they might be feeling nervous. They might be kind of scared. Maybe they've never been to therapy before. They don't really know what it's like or what to expect, or maybe they have been to therapy before and it wasn't a great experience. And so having that very first person that they interact with be warm and genuine and kind, and really make them feel heard and understood, really great reflective listening skills, that can make all the difference for not only being able to convert that client, but just helping them feel like they're held all through the process.
Well, yeah, that's great. I think empathetic listening and reflective listening is really important in this role. I'm curious, what's kind of when you are training, like what's one thing that you like to do to either test for that or to train in empathetic or reflective listening?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say empathy is the one thing that out of the three is the hardest to train. So if you can find somebody who maybe doesn't have the confidence or doesn't have the knowledge, you can train those things. But empathy, you want somebody to come into the job already having that skill. So one thing I do when I'm interviewing is look for reflective listening skills in the interview. And I'll even, as I describe the job position to them, I'll even tell them that one of the job requirements is reflective listening. And if they can pick up on that and start doing it, if they're not doing it already in the interview, because maybe they're nervous, but some people realize, oh, that's important, And so as we're interviewing, then they start to reflect back things that I've said about the job, or they'll ask some clarifying questions, or, just really feels like a warm back and forth conversation versus just a stale job interview. Then I know that that person's probably a good fit.
Got it. So if they're saying things like, well, Emily, what I hear you saying is this, and I'm curious about these things and this aspects of the job. So this kind of the act of reflecting back. Yeah, the empathy, because you can always reflect back what you're hearing, but if you're not empathetic in a way, then it can kind of feel like a robot. Because I know I work with AI chat, it reflects back to me, but sometimes the empathy, it is coming from a robot at the end of the day, but there's sort of that emotive side of things with over the phone that you can't capture always in the text.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So I'm not just looking for them to parrot back the things that I said, but do I feel like there's some real connection there?
Yeah, and you can't teach it. I think that's the most important thing I think listeners need to understand is the empathy is the one thing. Is it the difference between a hard skill, soft skill? Like this is something that you can't really teach. There's no really playbook for this. So you really have to screen that coming through the door, would be, I think, pretty important.
Yeah. Though I will say I have some questions in the consultation call script that I use that do help somebody who's already empathetic, just kind of guide them as they're going through the call, especially when they're new to, to ask those questions of clients and have them right there in the script. So that can help as well.
Yeah, because if you're overly empathetic, you may struggle to move them along in the conversation itself and moving it towards a successful, booking and that type of thing. What's maybe your one favorite tip that you could give for our really empathetic listeners out there that might struggle to keep moving that conversation forward?
Yeah, actually, I think that segues really nicely into confidence, which is
Okay.
the
Oh, good.
next aspect. Yeah. So, right, because if you're overly empathetic, then you just now are becoming the client's therapist, right? And as the intake coordinator, that's not your job to be their therapist, to listen. You can have clients who will go on for half an hour or an hour telling you all about their story and all the reason that they need to be in therapy. And you're like, yeah, but I need to actually like book you for therapy now.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so moving into the confidence piece, that's a little bit of sales training. And so that's where when I say that you can train that, I don't mean hire somebody who's just totally like timid and shy and not willing to say anything. Like they need to have some general sense of themselves and confidence. But the confidence in like booking the client and a little bit of sales training, that can be taught to somebody who already has kind of the personality trait of
Yeah.
confidence. And so, yeah, if somebody's really overly empathetic, they're spending a ton of time on the call with the client, but they're not actually closing the deal, getting them booked, then we do some sales training. Just some little tips, like not to be a slimy salesman, not that kind of sales
Yeah.
training, but just tips like moving the call along. We have a consultation call script. And so we're going to move from point A to point B to point C, framing the call at the beginning so the client knows exactly what to expect, that they're going to be asked some questions and given some information. And then ultimately being able to confidently recommend a therapist who's a good fit. I think this therapist would be a great fit, and this is why. They have an opening in their schedule Monday at 2 or Wednesday at 3. Which one would work best for you, right? And just getting that done. Yeah, so that's the confidence piece that can be trained, and they can learn how to do those things.
Yeah. That's really important. I think having a script, and eventually they'll probably just internalize it and know how to do it after some experience. Um, this sounds like a shameless plug for Therasast, but there is this really cool thing inside Therasast where there's like call scripts. So when they're on a call, they can just open this little side panel on there and follow, your kind of script for them and like where they need to be going to move along. So they don't have to have it memorized or have like a 3-ring binder open with all of it right there. To move that conversation along.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's such a cool tool that you have in there. That's neat.
yeah. People love that because intake coordinators sometimes they come and go, or someone needs to jump in and fill in and triage or something like that. So it's all right there for them. They don't have to go hunting for it.
Yeah.
What what else? Anything under the confidence piece?
Yeah, I think just well, and this kind of segues into knowledge a little bit too, but really knowing the therapists well, and then being able to confidently match a client with the best fit therapist. So kind of segueing into the knowledge piece, but that they know the therapist's schedules, their availability, their modalities, their preferences. So that's all on the knowledge piece, but then having the confidence to be able to pull that together and say to the client, I think Jane would be a great fit for you because you had mentioned anxiety, and she works a lot with clients who have anxiety, and she does DBT, which can be really helpful with the mindfulness, and I think that's going to be a really good fit for you. And just being able to, be the expert, be the guide who has, because the client's coming in totally like not knowing what to do or what to expect, and being able to confidently guide them through that whole process and get them booked really helps people feel safe and secure.
Yeah. Let's segue then maybe into the knowledge side, because having an understanding of the therapists who are at the practice, like walk me through kind of your systems maybe a little bit, and then maybe you can broaden on your knowledge topic too, because this is really important. Like therapists need to know, or the intake coordinators need to know who the therapists are, their specialties, so they can match them all. So kind of walk me through what maybe a little bit about your process to help intake coordinators go through that.
Yeah. So I like to hire people who already have some general understanding of the therapy world. They've been to therapy themselves. They understand kind of a layman's understanding of, different modalities. They're not going to know everything. They're not going to know the in-depth probably, but they have some general appreciation for therapy and are able to explain some things to clients already. Like it's great if they already have that framework when they come in. But then you can train them on the knowledge piece for the specific aspects of your therapy practice. And so make sure they understand each modality that the therapists do and that they can explain those easily in like 1 or 2 sentences to a client. An example is EMDR. Like they should just be able to explain that it's really great for trauma and that it can help past memories feel less like an immediate panic in the body, but instead it's just a distant memory, and so being able to have a really layman's way to describe the different modalities is important, and you can lay those out for them in whatever system you're using. I can talk about what I use, but you can lay out a few brief descriptions in case the intake coordinator forgets, but they shouldn't have to go searching every time a client asks a question. They should have a lot of this off the top of their heads. And then about each one of the therapists, I always have during onboarding, I'll have a new intake coordinator do a meeting with each therapist, just get to know them a little bit, get to know personality, get to know their preferences, ask them some questions about what their ideal client is. And this is really helpful as well if your practice has done some ideal client avatar work. So not just for the practice as a whole, but for each therapist should do an ideal client avatar. And that can really help the intake coordinator have a really good understanding. If the bio is written in that way where we understand the ideal client avatar from the bio, that's really ideal. But even on the back end, as long as the intake coordinator has some of that information, it can help them really match the therapists or match the clients to the therapist. And then sometimes you've got a really big practice where the intake coordinator is not going to be able to remember 25 different therapists' preferences and modalities and all of that. And that's where you really need to get systemized. So I use a spreadsheet, and I'm sure TheraSAS has something better, but I have a spreadsheet process where each therapist has a dashboard and they enter all of their modalities and preferences and specialties into their own dashboard. And then it pulls into a singular dashboard that the intake coordinator sees all in one place. So they can just see everybody at a glance. They can see this person does EMDR, yes, no, this person sees kids, yes, no, this one's virtual, this one's in person, all at a glance. So that's been a really helpful tool for me to be able to keep everything organized.
Yeah, that is something I've been working on the last 2 months, is like a matching tool that is so using AI to build this out, and we're getting ready to deploy it with one of our TheraSAS clients. It's like a beta test because they have a ton of clinicians, and I showed her what was possible, and she was like, yes, I need this right away. And the idea is that because there's also a lot of therapy websites that don't have an easy way for people to search on their own, and you also need something for intake coordinators as well. So it's basically, there's 2 aspects to it, and there's a database involved. So very similar, like you build out the clinician's profile on the back end, and then there's a matching tool, and then it'll ask you like 6 or 7 questions, and then it will show you the best match or the top 3 or 4 matches in the directory. And so people can use that who might be looking for a therapist, and as a starting point there, then they can click into the actual profile itself and read and watch a video or whatever if they have one. And then there's also then just like a directory. So think of it as like a Psychology Today, but just for your practice. So that way they can just click on the things that they're looking for, like symptoms or modalities, age, boom, 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 and it would just pull up a therapist or two, right there. And then they can, the intake team can just have a nice little starting point. So it's very similar to what your dashboard does. It just kind of serves both. It can serve both internally, but also externally as well for therapists. So, and it's like anything, right? Like the more time you take setting it up and giving the data, the better the results you're going to have, both from an intake team, but also from maybe a front facing, for your website when people come to it. So
yeah, that's an amazing tool. I am so glad. Like everybody need everything. Every practice needs what you just described
show it
there.
to you. I'll show it to you after the
Yeah,
recording.
that's great.
Yeah. Okay. The knowledge. Anything else on the knowledge side?
Oh, let's see. We covered modalities, specialties. Yeah, I think overall, you just want your intake coordinator to be a really good representation of your practice. So just kind of tying it all together, they should, a lot of times, if a therapist has been a solo practice for a while and they're just starting group practice, and they can be kind of hesitant to turn that piece over to somebody else.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard. They're afraid that, or they want to turn it over to their therapists, and they're like, well, my therapist knows their own schedule and my therapist knows their own modalities and all of that. So they can just do their own consultation calls. And while that's true, what therapists often lack is the sales training piece, because they do have their therapy hat on all day. And the therapy hat says, how are you feeling? Is this okay? Like, what do you want to do? And the intake coordinator, the sales hat, is saying, okay, sounds like so-and-so is a good fit, but let's get you booked, right? And that little shift in dynamic can make all the difference, where an intake coordinator can actually convert clients better than therapists sometimes. Some therapists really rock at that side of it. They can switch hats quickly, and they can do that. But I love to have the intake coordinator, because it takes the pressure off of the therapists to do that admin side, rather than running around doing free consultation calls and sending forms and all of that. They're just really focused on being a good therapist, and then all the intake and admin is on that side. And so, so I do like to have an intake coordinator for that reason, and just want to encourage the folks who are just dipping their toes in the water, or maybe they had a bad experience with an intake coordinator, that you can hire somebody who can be a really good representation of your practice overall.
Yeah. Let's talk about something on like compassion fatigue when it comes for intake coordinators. And one thing that I'm an advocate for when I do demo calls with Therasass, and say, look, I actually really love the idea of a form, some sort of form that they can fill out online, so that your intake coordinator can review that. So one of the things that Therasass I say is it helps you quickly capture and qualify and then close client leads. And it's that qualifying in the middle, I think, is really important as relates to compassion fatigue. So they can look at that and see that information, be like, okay, this person's going to be a good fit. I'm going to give them a call right away, or whatever. Because if you're just answering phones all the time, unless you're really trained, like you said, like just to like, is it a good fit or not within a few minutes, to get off, because otherwise people are just going to dump on you, like you have to set those boundaries. So I like that as a way to kind of help guard against compassion fatigue. But I'd love for you to kind of share what you see, and then maybe some tips that you have that might help guard against that, because they're going to be hearing stories all day long, and you only want them on the phone with like qualified leads at the end of the day for their own mental health, but also for it just makes good business sense.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think forms is definitely one way to make sure that the leads are qualified. I also think I just know, from having done this, that really working on your ideal client avatar, making sure your language is clear on your website, who you serve, do you take insurance or not, what are your rates, having some of those things really clear on the website can help with gain mostly qualified leads.
Yeah.
And then you can have a form. I like to do scheduled consultation calls. And then that kind of gives the intake coordinator the ability to prepare for the call, before she makes it. And I do find that those tend to convert better. But you can also have a form in there, and on the form you can have, like, say, a checkbox that says, do you understand that we do not take insurance, right? And
That's
so
right.
things like that can help with making sure that all the leads are qualified. And of course, still some are going to squeak through that are not qualified. But that's where having a really good consultation call script. And so I talked earlier about framing the call. So when the intake coordinator gets on the call, whether it's a live call or a scheduled call, or they're calling back from a form, they immediately start off with, this call is going to take about 20 minutes, and I'm going to ask you some questions so that I can find the therapist that's the right fit for you. We'll talk about insurance and scheduling rates, and I'll answer all of your questions. And so that framing helps the client understand there is a time limit on this call, and the intake coordinator is going to take control of the call and guide it. So they're going to ask the questions and the client's going to answer. And so that usually prevents too much just rambling on and on from the client. But sometimes you'll get a client who completely ignores that and just wants to go on and do their own thing. And so that's where it's helpful to teach the intake coordinator that it's okay to have those boundaries. It's okay to say, okay, thank you so much for sharing that with me, but now I have this question for you. Or, we do only have 10 minutes left on this call. I want to make sure we get all the information we need, and setting some of those boundaries. And then with the compassion fatigue part, that's so important, because I remember being an intake coordinator and you hear so many stories and it can be pretty stressful. So I think one of the things that would be really wonderful if practices would offer as a benefit to their intake coordinators is therapy. Not with them, obviously. There's conflict of interest. It would need to be with a different practice. But a lot of times these intake coordinators are independent contractors. And so you're not paying payroll taxes. You're not offering a bunch of other benefits. But if you did want to add one little perk in there, I think that would be it.
Yeah, interesting. Another thing, so let's talk about knowledge in this aspect, the knowledge from the practice owner standpoint. So I know one of the aspects with Therasas is like the transparency. You can see when people are making calls or responding to text messages and emails. But if somebody doesn't have that all centralized, how do you coach practice owners and intake coordinators around kind of that transparency piece and like job performance at the end of the day? Like what does that look like in those conversations that you have with them?
Yeah. So prior to Therasas, I've always used a contact log. And so this contact log has a lot of data, but it's real quick and easy for the intake coordinator to fill out. But we're capturing, referral source and presenting issue that the client is coming in with, and did they schedule a consultation call, and did they book a consult, or did they schedule a consultation call? Did they keep their consultation call? Basically, like everything through the workflow to track the metrics that we need to track the intake coordinator's performance. And so the number one key performance indicator of that is their conversion rate. And you'll hear the word conversions in a marketing sense, and they're talking about, did a client click from an ad, but what the real conversion number that we want to know is, did they book a session and then did they keep it? Their client's not really converted until they kept that first session and paid for it. So that's the number that we're looking for conversions. And the intake coordinators that use my process, I've got some that are at 50% conversion rate. I had a 50% conversion rate. And so the only reason that there should be not 100% is that some of your leads coming in are, maybe not qualified. But the other 50%, if they're a qualified lead, they should be getting booked. Like that's just, there's no reason for them to slip through the cracks because they didn't get a follow-up, or because their call was missed and they had to call back twice, or, all of these kinds of silly things that we can prevent. So that's where I like to see the intake coordinators really have that contact log in place. But what you have with Therasas is even better, that you can see all of transparently, the calls and the emails and everything in one place. But yeah, those metrics are really important to go through the whole process too. So from the time the client contacts, how long is it taking for them to get a response? And then when they get a response, what's converting better? Like I said, that scheduled consultation calls convert better, but you've had great experience with forms. So, then you just look at your numbers, try both ways, see what's working best for your practice. And yeah, all of those metrics are really important for making sure that the intake coordinator is doing their job well. And if they're not, it's not like you're in trouble. It's like, okay, where are we missing something in the workflow? What needs to be improved?
That's right. Yeah. And so you have like a Google sheet or something that you use for the call logs that you have. Yeah. Yeah, I think the conversion rate is helpful because it tells you a couple things. One is if it's low, is it an actual conversion issue as it relates to the intake coordinator not being able to book clients? Or is it two, maybe your clinicians are pretty full and it's really hard to actually slot somebody in because the hours aren't prime time hours for therapy, or the clinicians are just pretty much all booked up. And then, so that's important number to track because that's going to give the practice owner ideas like, well, maybe I need to hire somebody because we're just not able to convert because no one's available. And so that gives you the confidence to be able to move forward as well as a practice owner. So having some of those data points, I think, is really important. And to your point, I like, each practice is different if they do like a consult call or not. But I like that kind of two-step thing. One, a conversion event is they actually show up to the call itself and making sure they do. And do you have those automations in place and all those reminders? Hey, you got a consult call. That's important. And then the second one is kind of that second layer conversion is, did you book them? Are they inside your EHR now? And, they're scheduled and moving forward in that way. And that's kind of maybe more of a full, or do you actually then track, do they show up to the first session or not? Like that could be
Yeah,
like
no, I don't
even
consider
another
them
one.
converted until they show up for the first session.
Okay. Got it. Yeah. Ours, there's each practice kind of does it a little bit differently. So it's kind of up to you how you want that. But I like that. Some people are going like, they'll track them inside TheraSAS up to like 4 meetings. Like, are they almost like retained at that point? They didn't churn, are they more long-term? But that gets a little trickier because you have to get into the EHR data and update things that way. But I think those data tracking points are going to be really important. So I would like to just pivot for a few minutes and talk about like fractional COO type of work. So I would imagine, like, talk to me a little bit about how you come along practice owners. It sounds like you work with intake coordinators or you help train them. That's probably one aspect of it. What are some of the other things that you do?
Yeah, so on the operations management side, I'm actually all filled up at the moment, but I have a couple of practices that I'm, just running the operations for in the day to day. So like right now, one of my practice owners is on maternity leave. She's been gone for the last 4 months. I've hardly heard a word from her, and I'm just running the day to day operations of the practice. And
you are a blessing to that practice owner. I'll tell you that.
Yeah. So in that, managing the intake coordinator and the practice manager, therapists, doing quarterly meetings with them, talking to them about, like you mentioned, do you have availability? Just had that conversation the other day. Hey, the intake coordinator is noticing we don't have very many in-person evenings. We need to get some more, all those conversations. We're doing, like right now we're working on ideal client avatars for each therapist and boosting their bios, getting those better on the site. Then there's all the boring stuff, the running payroll and is, this therapist just hit their 1-year anniversary. Let's get them on health insurance and, all those kinds of operations, things in the day to day.
Yeah.
But where I do have openings is business coaching. And so that is taking all of that knowledge that I have from the operations management and coaching practice owners on how to do it themselves or how to hire the right person to do it. So how to hire an intake coordinator and then getting them trained. Maybe you're a solo practice moving into hiring your first therapist and, how to do that. Or maybe you've got 25 therapists in your practice. I had a recent client with that size practice, and they had all the framework, all of the team in place, but they just didn't know what they didn't know, so they had an operations manager, but she just didn't know some things. So coming in and doing some leadership training, and helping them with their retention rate is a huge thing. That's usually where I like to start with practices, because that's just money laying on the table that we can just start getting, bring that in this month, and then we'll worry about marketing next. But let's, get the revenue coming in from the clients you already have. Just all of those things. So on the business coaching side is just everything from A to Z on how to run your practice. And I have checklists and templates, and sometimes I get in there hands-on with them and help with things. So.
Okay. Yeah. So I would imagine if, let's say, my wife found actually somebody that could be a good director of operations, right? It fits, but they just don't have all that experience. You could come in and then coach that, her and this director of operations kind of in that, and like, here's the role, here's kind of like a playbook for
Yes.
for how one can be a director of ops? And do you find, because I imagine you do this remotely. So
Yes.
yeah, so someone can, okay, so maybe I'm just asking for my wife at this point, but I'm sure there's other people wondering about this too, because I imagine the pool that you can get from people is wider because it's remote. So how do you kind of embed yourself as a remote director of ops, fractional COO? Like, how do you embed yourself into the practice? Kind of walk me through that. And what does that look like on a weekly basis? I think that could be helpful too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I'm in, emails and Slack or whatever, communication that they need all throughout the day, jumping back and forth, and so just kind of checking in on things. So that really helps to be present and easily accessible. I always tell them, if there's something urgent, feel free to text me on a weekend or an evening, if
Mhm.
something comes up urgently. Team meetings is a big part of that. So like I meet with intake coordinators and practice managers. We meet weekly. I meet with the practice owner as needed. Although, honestly, like the longer I'm with them, the less we meet because I'm just running things. But,
Yeah.
in the beginning, we'll meet weekly or every other week or then monthly. We do team meetings with the whole team. So all of the therapists, depending on the size of the practice, but, like administrative once a month meeting where we kind of go over any new updates or anything that needs to be handled, and try to do that in a really relationship building way. So it's not just informational, but we make those real human to human connections, celebrate people's birthdays and anniversaries and things like that. But yeah, remote work in that way has always been really connective, and I just feel like I'm part of the team, even though I'm part of multiple teams. But when I'm there, I'm there, and I
Mhm.
talk about us as we, this is our success, right? Not like your success as the practice, but I'm part of that as well. And so that feels really good. And I've actually never met any of my clients in person ever.
Okay.
So yeah.
Yeah. Oh man. Okay. So tell me a little bit more. What's the personality kind of type? What kind of set of skills? We're talking about soft skills, hard skills. Like, you can't teach empathy in a lot of ways. What are some of those things that are like, if you're going to have a director of operations, they have to come into the job with at least these things, even if it's not knowledge in private practice, they at least need to have these things as it relates maybe to people, or yeah, I'd love to hear some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think some good leadership qualities are necessary. And, there's different styles of leadership, but you want somebody that is not too passive, but also not too much of a hard ass. So I don't mind being the person to hold people accountable. And sometimes that is a lot of the job. Therapists 30 days behind on their progress notes. And I'm saying, hey, we have to get the progress notes caught up, because if you don't have time to do progress notes, you don't have time for new clients, right?
Yep.
So like sometimes it has to be the person that can hold that hard line and say things like that, but
Mhm.
without being keeping the respect that they are the operations manager, not the owner. And so being able to still defer to the practice owner, being able to defer on clinical things. I'm not the clinical director. We have a clinical director who is a therapist that handles that side. And so being able to collaborate those two sides of the business with them. So being somewhat collaborative, but also able to hold people accountable when necessary. I think that soft skill is probably key, and also able to have hard conversations, like when therapists are thinking about leaving the practice maybe, and we need to talk about, hey, what's wrong, what's going on, how are you feeling, maybe there's interpersonal issues
Yeah.
between people, or and being able to navigate those conversations with some empathy and some care.
Yeah. So they need to come in with some of these skills, or at least just personality wise or something, to actually be able to navigate some of those
Yeah.
things. Um, okay, well, that's probably a whole nother other discussion on that. Well, can I ask, for like a fractional COO, director of ops, like, is it like per hour? Is it retainer? Like, kind of, how do you think about structuring these things if you were to coach um, somebody who might be going into this role?
Yeah, different things at different practices. It depends on the size of the practice. It depends on the experience of the operations manager. But I'll just give you a couple of like different ways to lay it out. Hourly is one option. or like a retainer, and then, hours can kind of roll over into another month, or they might use more, they might use less, but
Mhm.
there's that retainer in place. Or another way to do it, which I have at a practice, was a profit sharing thing. And
Okay.
so, especially if your operations manager is going to be, if one of their primary jobs is to get profit where it should be, doing a profit sharing thing can be really motivating for that. So that really
Yeah.
helps hold accountable, that these numbers that they're looking at, retention and conversions, and everything is all directly tied to the profit that they're receiving as like a bonus. So yeah, some different ways to lay it out.
Yeah, they're kind of aligned then with their incentives. So maybe there's like a base number, and then there could be like a little performance bonus on top of that
Yep,
if you get their
exactly.
goals. Okay. I like that. Wow. Okay. Well, well, this was super helpful, Emily. Maybe we need to have another discussion around the director of ops types of things,
Yeah.
because I think I have a feeling there's going to be a lot of people interested in you coaching somebody up. Maybe that they have. I mean, I want to think about listeners here. Maybe you have someone on your team already that kind of could fit this role, but you just don't know where to begin, right? You can kind of promote from within, and maybe
Yes.
working with Emily to coach them up into that role and kind of act as a really trusted guide in that area. Or maybe you have somebody in mind and you just don't know, and Emily needs to interview them for you and get feedback. Maybe that's another. Is that something you've done before
Yeah,
too? Or, yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
So like that would be kind of fascinating too. Like a third. Yeah, I think that would be really interesting. So I think there's some interesting use cases for your unique skill set there, Emily.
Yeah.
But yeah, so thank you for joining. How can people find out more about you?
So you can find me at confidentprivatepractice.com. I am doing a webinar like a free training on the third Monday of every month. And so this last one I did on retention. I might duplicate that the next couple of months, do retention training of, how to get your therapist to retain their clients. Why do you even want to retain clients? Is it even ethical to retain clients? All of these questions about retention. And then some future trainings will be on conversions, hiring, profit, lots of different topics upcoming, but that's the third Monday of every month. And yeah, you can find me on the website, and you can schedule a free consultation call. I do a 30-minute consultation. So if you're curious about business coaching or operations management, having me train somebody or train your intake coordinators, doing live trainings with your intake coordinator or your therapists. Yeah, lots of offerings there. So you can find me on the website and book a consultation call.
Great. Confidentprivatepractice.com. I love how clear and simple that is. All right. Well, thank you so much, Emily, for joining me on another TheraSAS podcast. If you guys are watching this on YouTube, please sure to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this content. My goal really is to help simplify sales and marketing for private practice owners. And sometimes we talk about operations as well. So thank you for joining me on the podcast, and we'll see you on the next one. Thank
All
you.
right. Thanks for having me.